She ran like her life depended on it, because it did. The grand Whitmore estate was blazing with candlelight, but inside that ballroom, a marriage contract was being signed with her name on it. A man she never chose, a future she never agreed to. And if she stayed one more minute, it would be sealed forever. Her slippers hit the wet cobblestones as she flew through the side gate, skirts gathered in both fists, heart hammering, breath burning. Then she saw it. A black carriage, massive, still, parked at the far end of the shadowed lane. No footman, no sound. Even the horses stood like they had been warned not to breathe. Every servant in London whispered about this carriage. This belonged to the Duke of Blackthorn, the man they called cold as iron, the man whose very name made hostesses lower their voices. Annalise knew all of this. She climbed inside anyway. Then, from across the grounds, a voice tore through the night like thunder. Find her, search every gate, every road.
Find her, search every gate, every road, every shadow. Do not let her leave!
Her uncle. And he was close. She pressed into the corner, shaking, barely breathing. Then the carriage door opened. A face, carved, cold, unreadable. Eyes that did not widen in surprise. Eyes that simply looked at her, steady and still. Then, very quietly, he spoke. You are safe now. If you were Annalise, would you have trusted him or jumped straight back out? Drop your answer in the comments and tell us where you are watching from. If this story already has your heart, hit that subscribe button right now. You do not want to miss what comes next. The contract was already on the table. Annalise Pemberton saw it the moment she slipped back through the servants' corridor and pressed herself flat against the wall beside the drawing-room door. The candlelight inside spilled through the crack, warm and golden, and completely at odds with the cold dread wrapping itself around her chest. Her uncle, Lord Silas Pemberton, stood at the head of the long mahogany table, with his shoulders squared and his chin lifted, the way he always stood when he was certain he had already won. Beside him, rolling a quill between his thick fingers, sat Lord Rutherford Crane, 53 years old, 3 times widowed, owner of half the coal mines in the north and every debt her uncle had quietly accumulated over the past 4 years. Annalise had met Lord Crane exactly once. He had looked at her the way a man looks at a painting he intends to purchase, not with admiration, with assessment. She was 19 years old. Her uncle's voice drifted through the crack in the door, smooth and satisfied. She will come around. Girls always do once the papers are signed. It is simply nerves. Lord Crane made a low sound that was not quite a laugh. I do not need her to come around, Pemberton. I need her name on the second line before the clock strikes 10. That was our arrangement. Annalise did not wait to hear her uncle's response. She turned and walked. Then she walked faster. Then, by the time she reached the side corridor that opened onto the back gardens, she was running. The Whitmore estate had been dressed for the evening's celebration. Lanterns strung along the garden paths, hired musicians playing somewhere beyond the tall hedgerow, guests in their finest, moving through the grand rooms like figures in a painting. Nobody noticed the girl in the ivory gown cutting across the wet lawn with her skirts bunched in both hands and her hair beginning to slip from its pins. Nobody except the head housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, who called after her in a sharp whisper that Annalise did not stop to answer. She pushed through the Ironside gate and came out onto the lane that ran along the back of the estate. It was darker here, away from the lanterns, and the night air hit her like cold water. She pressed one hand to her sternum and forced herself to breathe. Think. She needed to think. She had no money on her person. Her reticule was upstairs in the guest room, where she had been given space to dress. Her lady's maid, young Tilly, had been told to wait there, and Annalise had slipped away during the moment everyone assumed she was still primping before her grand entrance into the celebration that was, in truth, her own quiet sale. She could not go back inside. The moment she walked through any door of that house, her uncle would have her by the arm and in front of that contract before she could draw breath. She could not walk to the main road in an evening gown without being noticed, questioned, and returned. She stood very still in the dark lane and looked left and right, her mind turning fast. That was when she saw the carriage. It was parked at the far end of the lane, half swallowed by shadow, massive and black and utterly still. No livery, no footman posted at the step. The two horses in the traces stood with an eerie, disciplined quiet, as though they had been taught that stillness was a form of power. Annalise had grown up in London society. She knew carriages the way she knew faces, by reputation, by association, by the things people said about them in careful voices at careful distances. And this carriage, with its particular iron fittings and the single unadorned crest barely visible on the door panel, she knew. Everyone knew it. This was the Duke of Blackthorn's carriage. His Grace, Dorian Blackthorn, the 7th Duke, 30 years old and already the most quietly feared man in 3 counties. Not because he was cruel, people said, at least not obviously, but because he was utterly unreadable, because he had returned from the continent 2 years ago with something behind his eyes that had not been there before, because he came to exactly the social events he chose to come to, stayed exactly as long as he decided, and left without explanation, and nobody, not even the most powerful hostesses in London, said a word against him for it. They also said he had ended 2 men's careers simply by withdrawing his favour, quietly, without confrontation. The men had simply found every door in London closed to them within a season. Annalise stood in the dark lane and looked at his carriage. From behind her, back across the grounds, she heard the drawing-room window thrown open, and then her uncle's voice, stripped of its earlier smoothness, sharp and carrying. Find her. She could not have gone far. Search every gate, every road, every shadow if you must. Do not let her leave these grounds. Annalise moved before she had fully decided to move. She crossed the lane in quick, silent steps, reached the carriage door and pulled it open. The interior was dark. It smelled of leather and something faintly resinous, like wood smoke and cedar. She gathered her skirts, stepped up, and pulled the door shut behind her as gently as she could manage. Then she pressed herself into the far corner, drew her knees up, wrapped both arms around herself, and went completely still. Her heart was so loud she was certain it could be heard outside. Footsteps on the cobblestones. Voices, 2 or 3 of them, moving along the lane. She recognized the clipped bark of her uncle's man, Grover, a heavy-set former soldier who had served Silas Pemberton for a decade and had never once shown Annalise anything but cold indifference. Check the lane, both ends, and look inside every carriage you find, Lord Pemberton's orders. Annalise stopped breathing. The footsteps came closer, slowed. She could see the faint flicker of a lantern through the narrow gap at the edge of the carriage curtain. She pressed further into the corner, squeezing her eyes shut, fingers digging into her own arms. Then the carriage door opened. Not from the outside, from the other side, the opposite door, the one she had not come through. He stepped in without haste, without any sign of surprise. He settled into the seat across from her with the calm of a man sitting down to read the morning paper, and he looked at her with eyes that were dark and entirely steady. The Duke of Blackthorn was exactly as she had imagined him, and nothing like it at the same time. His features were sharp and composed, the kind of face that gave nothing away by habit. He wore no expression that she could name. He simply looked at her, quiet and still, as the lantern light outside moved closer along the lane. She waited for him to speak, to demand an explanation, to open the door and hand her over. He did none of those things. He reached forward, very slowly, and drew the curtain fully closed across the window. Then he settled back in his seat, crossed one leg over the other, and folded his hands in his lap. The lantern light passed, the footsteps moved on. Grover's voice faded down the lane, irritable and retreating. Silence settled over the carriage interior. Annalise realized she had been holding her breath for a very long time. She let it out slowly, shakily, and looked at the man sitting across from her in the dark. He was still watching her, not with curiosity, with something quieter than that, something almost careful. "You are safe now," he said. His voice was low, not soft exactly, but controlled in a way that felt deliberate, like he had decided on calm, and nothing was going to move him from it. Annalise stared at him. "You do not know me," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "No," he agreed. "You do not know why I am in your carriage." "No, and you are not going to ask?" He looked at her for a moment. Not tonight. She did not know what to do with that. She had prepared herself for anger, for cold dismissal, for the kind of proprietary outrage that men like him were entitled to display toward women who invaded their private spaces without invitation. She had not prepared herself for this. For quiet, for a curtain drawn without a word. "They will keep searching," she said. "They will not search this carriage a second time," he replied. There was no arrogance in it, just certainty. She believed him. She did not entirely know why, but she believed him. Outside, the sounds of the search gradually moved away from the lane, back toward the main grounds. Somewhere in the distance, the musicians were still playing, as though nothing in the world had changed. Annalise slowly unwrapped her arms from around herself. Her fingers were cold. Her hair was half undone. She was sitting in the private carriage of the most feared Duke in London in the dark, with absolutely no plan beyond the next 5 minutes. She looked at him. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why did you close the curtain?" He considered this for a moment, the way a man considers a question he has already turned over privately before it was spoken aloud. "Because," he said, "whoever is searching for you in the dark with that much urgency is not looking for you out of love." Annalise felt something shift in her chest, something she could not name right then. She looked away toward the curtained window and said nothing. The carriage was still. The night outside was quiet, and for the first time since she had seen that contract on the table, she did not feel like she was falling. He did not ask her to explain herself that night. When the sounds of the search had fully retreated and the lane outside had gone quiet enough to trust, the Duke of Blackthorn rapped twice on the interior panel, and the carriage rolled forward without a word from anyone. Annalise did not ask where they were going. She sat with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap, watching the curtained window as the sounds of the Whitmore estate faded behind them. The carriage moved through the streets of London at an unhurried pace. The Duke sat across from her, one arm resting along the window ledge, his gaze somewhere between her direction and the middle distance. He did not stare. He did not make her feel observed. He simply existed in the same space with the kind of ease that felt almost offensive, given how completely unravelled she felt inside. After several minutes of silence, he spoke. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Annalise considered lying. She was good at giving the expected answer, the polished answer, the answer that kept the peace and kept people from asking further questions. She had been trained for it since childhood. "No," she said instead. He nodded once, as though that confirmed something he had already suspected. "Then we will go to Blackthorn House. You will be given a room and whatever you need for the night. Tomorrow, if you choose to explain your situation, I will listen. If you do not, I will arrange for you to go wherever you wish to go." She looked at him carefully. "Just like that? Just like that? You are not concerned about what people will say? A young woman arriving at your residence in the middle of the night?" Something moved at the corner of his mouth. It was not quite a smile. It was the shadow of one, brief and controlled. "Miss, I have been the subject of London's whispers for 2 years. I find I manage." Annalise almost laughed. She caught it before it escaped, but it surprised her, the sudden lightness of it rising in the middle of everything. She turned back to the window. "Annalise," she said quietly, "my name is Annalise Pemberton." A pause. "Dorian Blackthorn. I know who you are." "Most people do," he said, and there was something dry in it, something that was not bitterness, but sat close to its edge. They arrived at Blackthorn House 20 minutes later. It was a large, severe townhouse on a quiet street, its facade unadorned and its windows mostly dark. A butler named Mr. Hatch met them at the door with the particular composure of a man who had long since stopped being surprised by anything his employer brought home. He showed Annalise to a guest room on the second floor without question, arranged for hot water, and sent a young housemaid named Prue to attend to her. Prue was perhaps 16, small and quick-eyed, with the kind of efficient silence that made her immediately likeable. She helped Annalise out of her evening gown, found her a plain nightgown from somewhere, and unpinned the wreckage of her hair without commenting on its state. "Is there anything else, miss?" Prue asked, setting a small tray of bread and warm milk on the bedside table. "No, thank you, Prue." The girl bobbed and slipped out. Annalise sat on the edge of the bed for a long time without moving. The room was clean and quiet and entirely neutral, the kind of room that asked nothing of you. She looked at her hands in her lap. They had stopped shaking. Finally, she thought about the contract, about her uncle's voice tearing across the dark grounds, about Lord Crane's eyes moving over her face like she was acreage to be surveyed. She thought about what would have happened if she had stayed. Then she thought about the curtain drawn quietly across the window without a single word of demand or explanation, and she pressed her fingers to her mouth and sat with that for a long time. She did not sleep until very late. In the morning, she was shown to a small breakfast room at the back of the house where light came in through tall windows and a fire had already been lit against the morning chill. The Duke was already there, standing at the window with a cup in hand, dressed plainly for the hour, his dark hair slightly less composed than it had been the night before. He turned when she entered. "Good morning." "Good morning," she said carefully, and took the seat that had been laid for her. For a few minutes they were quiet. The only sounds were the small domestic orchestra of a household morning, the distant clatter of the kitchen, the fire settling, the occasional footstep in the corridor. Then Annalise set down her cup and said, "My uncle has been accumulating debt for 4 years. He owes Lord Rutherford Crane a very large sum. The arrangement, as I understand it, is that the debt is cancelled in exchange for me." The Duke said nothing. He was looking at her with that same steady, unreadable attention. "Lord Crane is 53. He has buried 3 wives. I do not know the circumstances of their deaths, and I did not wait around to investigate." She paused. "I have no access to my own money until I am 25, by the terms of my father's will. My father died when I was 11. My uncle has been my guardian since then." She folded her hands on the table. "That is the situation." The Duke set down his cup. He moved to the table and took the seat across from her, and for a moment he simply looked at her with an expression she could not decode. "How long has your uncle known about this arrangement?" he asked. "At least 6 months, possibly longer. I found a letter 3 months ago that I was not meant to see. I have been trying to find a way out since then, and last night was the deadline." The contract was already on the table when I ran. A silence settled between them. Outside the window, the morning street was beginning to wake, the sound of cartwheels and distant voices drifting in. "You cannot go back," he said. It was not a question. "No, and you have no other family. No one your uncle cannot reach." She thought of her mother's younger sister, Aunt Cecily, then corrected herself. Her mother's cousin Harriet, who had married a clergyman in Shropshire and lived quietly there with 4 children and very little means. "There is someone, but she cannot protect me from a legal guardianship, not without help." The Duke was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have a solicitor, one who is very good at examining the legality of guardianship arrangements and financial transactions, particularly when those transactions involve a ward's person being used as collateral." Annalise looked at him. "That would take time." "Yes. And in the meantime?" He met her eyes steadily. "In the meantime, you are a guest in this house, and whatever your uncle claims, whatever Lord Crane insists upon, neither of them will come through my door uninvited." She held his gaze for a long moment, searching it for the thing she was waiting for, the condition, the price, the thing he would eventually want in return for all of this quiet, deliberate protection. She found nothing she could name. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. The same question she had almost asked the night before, but sharper now, in the daylight, with the politeness of exhaustion stripped away. He was quiet for a moment, not evasive, thoughtful. "My mother," he said at last, "was given to a man she did not choose, by a family who told her it was her duty and her honour and her great good fortune." He paused. "She spent 20 years being quietly destroyed by that great good fortune." Annalise said nothing. She waited. "I was 12 when she died," he said. "I have thought about that contract my entire life." The breakfast room was very still. Outside, a cart horse clattered past on the street. The fire popped softly. Somewhere deeper in the house, Mr. Hatch was giving quiet instructions to someone in the corridor. Annalise looked at the man across the table from her, the man London called cold as iron, the man they whispered about in careful voices, and she saw, for just a moment, beneath the composed face and the careful stillness, something that had been waiting a very long time to be useful. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded once. Then he picked up his cup, turned slightly toward the window, and let the morning move on around them. But Annalise noticed that he did not leave the room. He stayed quietly, as though being near was enough and needing nothing in return was the most natural thing in the world. She picked up her own cup and let herself, just slightly, exhale. The trouble arrived before noon. Annalise was sitting in the small library on the first floor, a book open in her lap that she had not read a single word of when she heard the knock at the front door. Not the polite, measured knock of a morning caller, the kind of knock that wanted to be heard 3 rooms away. She went still. From the corridor, she heard Mr. Hatch's unhurried footsteps. Then the door opened. Then a voice she recognized immediately, smooth and controlled on the surface, with something hot and furious running just beneath it. Her uncle. "I am here to see the Duke of Blackthorn. You will tell him Lord Silas Pemberton is at his door. Now." Annalise closed the book. She stood up slowly, her pulse climbing. She heard Mr. Hatch's reply, calm and entirely immovable. "His Grace is not receiving visitors this morning, my lord. If you wish to leave a card, I will see that it is passed along." "I am not leaving a card," her uncle's voice tightened. "I am looking for my niece. She is 19 years old. She disappeared from the Whitmore estate last night, and I have very good reason to believe she is in this house. Now stand aside." "I am afraid I cannot do that, my lord." A pause. Then, lower and uglier, "Do you know who I am?" "Quite well, my lord." Annalise was already moving toward the door of the library. She did not know what she intended to do. She only knew that standing still, while her uncle stood 10 feet away, felt impossible. She had barely reached the corridor when the Duke appeared at the top of the staircase. He came down the stairs without hurry, adjusting one cufflink, his expression composed and utterly indifferent in the way that she was beginning to understand was not coldness but armour. He reached the bottom of the stairs, glanced once in her direction, and said quietly, "Go back to the library." She opened her mouth. "Please," he added. Just that one word, and something in the way he said it made her stop. It was not an order dressed as a request. It was a man asking her to trust him within the next 5 minutes. She stepped back into the library doorway, but did not close the door. The Duke walked to the entrance hall. Mr. Hatch moved aside. Silas Pemberton stood on the front step, broad-shouldered and grey-templed, his riding coat still carrying the damp of the morning. Behind him, slightly to his left, stood Grover, thick-armed and watchful. And beside Grover, which made Annalise's stomach drop, stood a man she had not expected. Young, sharp-faced, with a legal satchel under one arm, a solicitor. Her uncle had brought a solicitor. Silas looked at the Duke with the careful respect of a man who feared him and resented the fear in equal measure. "Blackthorn, I apologize for the hour. This is a family matter, and I intend to resolve it quickly." "Good morning, Pemberton," the Duke said. His voice was pleasant. Dangerously pleasant, the way a very calm sea is dangerous. "What can I do for you?" "My niece is missing. I have reason to believe she entered your carriage last night without your knowledge. I am here to collect her, and I assure you no blame is attached to your household." "I see." The Duke tilted his head slightly. "And your reason for this belief?" "One of my men saw a young woman enter a carriage matching your description in the lane behind Whitmore Estate." "Matching my description," the Duke repeated thoughtfully. "There are a great many black carriages in London, Pemberton." Silas's jaw tightened. "Blackthorn, I am asking you, as a gentleman, to simply confirm or deny whether my niece is on your premises. That is all. And if I were to confirm it," the Duke said, still pleasant, still utterly unmoved, "what would you do?" "I would take her home. She is my ward. I have legal guardianship until she is 25. Any person found to be harbouring her against the terms of that guardianship would be in a very uncomfortable legal position." He gestured to the sharp-faced young man with the satchel. "My solicitor, Mr. Fenwick, has the relevant documentation." Mr. Fenwick stepped forward and held out a folded paper. The Duke did not take it. He looked at it for a moment, then looked back at Silas with an expression that had not shifted by a single degree. "I will have my own solicitor contact yours," he said, "by the end of the week." Silas stared at him. "The end of the week. Good day, Pemberton." And the Duke stepped back, and Mr. Hatch, moving with the serene efficiency of a man who had rehearsed this moment, closed the front door. The entrance hall went quiet. Annalise stood in the library doorway, with one hand pressed flat against the doorframe, her knees not entirely steady. She heard her uncle's voice outside, briefly, sharp with fury, and then the sound of horses and wheels moving away down the street. The Duke turned. He saw her in the doorway, and he did not say anything immediately. He simply looked at her for a moment with that careful, measuring gaze. "He brought a solicitor," she said. Her voice was not as steady as she wanted it to be. "He did. He will come back." "He will," the Duke agreed, "but not today. And by the time he does, we will be better prepared than he expects." She looked at him. "You said we." He held her gaze. "I said we." Something moved through her chest, warm and sharp and frightening all at once. She looked away before he could see what was happening in her face. That afternoon, the Duke's solicitor arrived. His name was Mr. Aldous Finch, a lean, precise man of 60 with ink-stained fingers and reading spectacles that he pushed up his nose with one finger every time he made an important point. He sat at the long table in the Duke's study, spread 3 documents across the surface, and listened to Annalise speak for 45 minutes without interrupting once. When she finished, he pushed his spectacles up. "The guardianship itself is legal, unpleasant, but legal." He paused. "However, the use of a ward's person as direct collateral for a personal debt is considerably less clear, particularly if the ward was not informed of the debt or consulted regarding the arrangement." "I was told nothing," Annalise said. "I found out from a letter I was not meant to read." Mr. Finch looked at the Duke over his spectacles. If she was deliberately excluded from knowledge of an arrangement directly affecting her future and her person, and if Lord Crane was aware that she had not given any form of consent, there is an argument to be made. He paused again. "It will not be fast, and Pemberton will fight it." "He will fight it very hard," Annalise said quietly. "Yes, which means," Mr. Finch said, folding his hands, "that in the interim your position needs to be unassailable. You cannot simply be a young woman sheltering in a bachelor household. That narrative will be used against you before the week is out." The room went very still. Annalise looked at the documents on the table. She felt the shape of what Mr. Finch was moving toward before he said it, and she felt her whole body resist it even as her mind acknowledged its logic. "What are you suggesting?" the Duke asked. His voice was level. Mr. Finch pushed his spectacles up. "I am suggesting, Your Grace, that the most legally and socially protective position for Miss Pemberton at this present moment would be one that removes her entirely from Lord Pemberton's guardianship jurisdiction." A pause. An engagement, even an informal one made known in the right circles, would complicate his ability to enforce the contract with Crane considerably. Silence. Annalise felt heat rise in her face. She stared at the table. "I understand it is an unconventional suggestion," Mr. Finch added, with the careful understatement of a man who knew perfectly well how unconventional it was. "It is a significant suggestion," the Duke said quietly. "Yes, Your Grace." Mr. Finch gathered his papers. "I leave it entirely to your judgment. I will begin examining the guardianship terms and the debt arrangement regardless. But I thought it best to place all options before you." He stood, bowed to each of them, and let himself out. The study door clicked shut. Annalise and the Duke sat on opposite sides of the long table with 3 feet of polished mahogany between them and the silence of a very large, very complicated thing that had just entered the room and settled itself down without being invited. She spoke first. "You do not have to do that." "I know," he said. "It would be an enormous imposition on your life." "Yes, and people would talk." "They already talk," he said quietly. "They have talked about me since I came back from the continent. I have made my peace with London's opinions." She looked at him directly. "I am asking you seriously, not as a woman in need of rescue, as a person asking another person to be honest with her. He met her eyes. Something shifted in his expression, very slightly, like a door opened a crack to let in a sliver of light. "I know," he said again, "and I am telling you seriously, I am not afraid of the arrangement." A pause. "I am asking whether you are." She held his gaze for a long moment. Her heart was doing something loud and inconvenient. "I am terrified," she said honestly. "Of me?" he asked. "Quiet? Direct?" "No," she said, just as quietly. "Of wanting this for the wrong reasons." He was still for a moment. Then something moved across his face that she had not seen there before, not quite vulnerability, something older than that. Something that had been sitting in him for a very long time, patient and unspoken. "That," he said softly, "may be the most honest thing anyone has said to me in years." Outside the study window, the afternoon light was turning gold across the street. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed 3. And in the quiet study of the most feared Duke in London, 2 people sat with a complicated, terrifying, quietly hopeful thing stretched out between them, and neither of them looked away. The news reached Mayfair by Thursday morning. Annalise did not know exactly how it travelled so fast. She suspected Lady Octavia Drummond, who had sharp eyes and sharper connections, and who had apparently been present at the Whitmore estate on the night in question, and had noticed the Duke's early departure with considerable interest. Whatever the source, by Thursday, 3 separate morning callers had appeared at Blackthorn House, and Mr. Hatch had turned away all 3 with serene finality. By Friday, a notice had appeared in the social pages that described, in the careful and loaded language of London gossip columns, the apparent connection between the Duke of Blackthorn and a certain Miss Pemberton, whose sudden disappearance from the Whitmore celebration had set tongues moving across the city. Annalise read it at the breakfast table and set the paper down without comment. Across from her, the Duke drank his coffee and said, "It is better than I expected. It implies I am your mistress," she said flatly. "It implies a connection. The implication is theirs, not ours." He paused. "Mr. Finch is moving on the guardianship question, and I have sent a private letter to Lord Crane." She looked up. "What kind of letter?" "The kind that makes clear that pursuing his arrangement with your uncle would be inadvisable." She stared at him. "You cannot simply threaten Lord Crane." "I did not threaten him. I informed him." The corner of his mouth moved. "There is a difference." She wanted to press him on it, but before she could, the door of the breakfast room opened, and Prue appeared, slightly breathless, her quick eyes wider than usual. "Begging your pardon, miss, your grace. There is a woman at the back door asking for Miss Pemberton. She says her name is Mrs. Harriet Callow. She says she is family." Annalise was on her feet before Prue finished the sentence. Harriet Callow was her mother's cousin, 41 years old, soft-spoken, with kind eyes and the practical, unflappable manner of a woman who had raised 4 children, largely on her own, while her husband attended to his parish and his books. She had travelled from Shropshire overnight, arriving with a single bag and the expression of a woman who had read a letter, made a decision, and acted on it without wasting time on hesitation. She took both of Annalise's hands the moment she saw her, looked at her face carefully, and said, "You are all right." "I am all right," Annalise confirmed, and to her profound embarrassment felt her eyes sting. Harriet pulled her close and held her for a moment, and Annalise pressed her face against her cousin's shoulder and allowed herself, briefly, to stop being composed. When she straightened, the Duke was standing in the doorway of the small sitting room where Prue had brought them. He looked at Harriet with his usual careful attention. "Mrs. Callow," he said, "thank you for coming. Harriet looked at him with the direct, assessing gaze of a woman who had no patience for pretension. "Your Grace," she said, "I want to understand exactly what the situation is, and exactly what your intentions are toward my cousin, if you do not mind." End quote. "I do not mind at all," he said, and stepped aside to let her in. They spent an hour together, the three of them, in the Duke's study. Harriet asked precise, unsentimental questions. The Duke answered them with the same precision. Annalise sat between them and felt, strangely, as though the ground beneath her feet was becoming slightly more solid with each passing minute. Harriet's presence changed things in ways that were both practical and social. She could serve as a chaperone, which addressed the most obvious concern about Annalise's position in the household. Her arrival from Shropshire also demonstrated, quietly and clearly, that Annalise had family who were paying attention, which complicated her uncle's preferred narrative of a ward who had run away in a fit of girlish hysteria. It was during this conversation that the second blow arrived. Mr. Hatch appeared at the study door with the expression of a man delivering unwelcome news with great professional dignity. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace. A letter has just been delivered by hand, marked urgent." The Duke took it, glanced at the seal, and his expression shifted in a way that Annalise had not seen before. Not alarm. Something colder than that. He read it, then he set it on the desk and looked at the wall for a moment. "What is it?" Annalise asked. He looked at her. "Your uncle has filed a formal complaint with the magistrate. He is claiming that you were taken from the Whitmore estate under duress, that you did not leave of your own free will." The room went very quiet. "He is saying," Annalise said slowly, "that you took me." "Yes." Harriet made a sharp sound. "That is a lie." "It is," the Duke said. "But it is a lie that will need to be answered formally and quickly, because if it is allowed to stand, even for a week, the magistrate has grounds to compel your return to your uncle's custody while the matter is investigated." Annalise felt the floor shift beneath her again. All the solid ground she had been carefully building over the past 4 days tilting sideways. She looked at the Duke. His face was composed, but she was beginning to learn the small signals beneath the composure, the slight tension at the jaw, the careful stillness that meant he was thinking very fast. "Mr. Finch," she said. "I am sending for him now," he said. He was already at the desk, writing, "And I need you to write a statement, in your own hand, clearly dated and witnessed, describing exactly what happened that night, in exact detail, from the moment you saw the contract to the moment you entered this house. I can do that. Every detail matters, nothing softened." "I understand." He looked up from the desk. For a moment his eyes held hers, and there was something in them that was not just legal strategy, something more personal than that. Something that said he was not simply managing a situation. He was angry on her behalf, quietly and completely, in a controlled way that was more dangerous than noise. "He will not win this," he said. It was not a reassurance. It was a statement of intent. Mr. Finch arrived within the hour, slightly windswept, spectacles already pushed up. He read the magistrate's letter twice, set it down, and said, "Bold move." "Risky, but bold." He looked at the Duke. "He is gambling that the scandal will force your hand, that you will want the matter resolved quickly and quietly, and that the quickest resolution available is returning the girl." "He has miscalculated," the Duke said. "Clearly," Mr. Finch said dryly. "I will file a counter-response today. Miss Pemberton's statement will be central. Missus Callow's presence as a witness to the current arrangement is also useful." He paused. However, I want to raise something. He pushed his spectacles up. There is a second element to the debt arrangement that I found in my examination of the documents. Lord Crane did not simply agree to cancel the debt in exchange for the marriage. He has been making quarterly payments directly to Pemberton's personal account for the past 18 months. Silence. He has been paying for her, Harriet said. The words came out flat and cold. In advance. Yes. Mr. Finch's voice was carefully neutral, which changes the legal character of the arrangement considerably. It is no longer simply a debt cancellation. It has the structure of a transaction, which opens a different set of questions entirely. Annalise sat very still. She had known the arrangement was mercenary. She had known her uncle saw her as an asset rather than a person. But hearing it laid out in those precise, quiet words, payments made quarterly, in advance, for 18 months, felt different from knowing it abstractly. It felt like something was being pressed into her chest with great force. She kept her face still. She breathed steadily. She did not allow the room to see what it cost her. But the Duke saw it. She knew he saw it, because she caught the moment his gaze moved to her face, and the quality of his attention changed. It became very quiet, very focused. The way a person looks at someone they are trying to hold together from across a room without touching them. When the meeting ended, and Mr. Finch and Harriet had moved to the adjoining room to review documents, the Duke remained at the desk. Annalise stood at the window, looking out at the street below. "Say what you are thinking," he said quietly. She was quiet for a moment. "I am thinking that I was being sold in installments for 1.5 years while I sat at my uncle's dinner table every Sunday and thanked him for his guardianship." She paused. "I am thinking about how many times I tried to be good enough, polite enough, grateful enough, as though the problem was me." She heard him move. She did not turn around, but she felt him come to stand a few feet behind her, close enough that she was aware of him without it being anything she could object to. "The problem," he said, "was never you." She pressed her fingers against the cold glass of the window. Outside, a group of children were chasing a dog down the street, laughing, completely unconcerned with contracts and magistrates and the quiet violence of being someone else's transaction. "I know that," she said softly. "I am just learning how to feel it." He said nothing more. He simply stayed, standing a few feet behind her in the afternoon, quiet, present and steady, while she looked out the window and let herself feel, properly and fully, the thing she had been too busy surviving to feel before. It was, she thought, a very particular kind of kindness, the kind that did not try to fix or redirect or reframe, the kind that simply refused to leave. She did not turn around, but she was grateful in a way that had no adequate words that he was there. The magistrate's hearing was set for Monday. Mr. Finch delivered the news on Saturday morning with the calm efficiency of a man who understood that panic was a luxury nobody in this situation could afford. He sat at the study table, laid out 4 documents, and walked through each one with the methodical patience that Annalise had come to find deeply reassuring over the past week. Her statement had been written, signed, witnessed by both Mr. Finch and Harriet, and filed. The counter-response to her uncle's complaint had been submitted, and Mr. Finch had quietly sent word to 2 individuals who had direct knowledge of Lord Crane's financial arrangements with Silas Pemberton, a former clerk named Mr. Osei, who had left Crane's employment 8 months ago under unhappy circumstances, and a woman named Mrs. Daphne Whitfield, a widow of independent means, who had been approached by Lord Crane 3 years prior with a remarkably similar arrangement involving her own recently orphaned niece. Mrs. Whitfield had declined. Her niece had been fortunate. but she remembered every detail. "She is willing to speak?" the Duke asked. "Quite willing," Mr. Finch said, with the faintest note of satisfaction. "She has been waiting for an appropriate occasion." Annalise looked at the document in front of her. "And Mr. Ose?" "He kept records," Mr. Finch said simply. "The kind that were not meant to be kept." Harriet, seated beside Annalise with her hands folded and her expression composed, said, "What about Silas himself? What will he do when he realizes the hearing is not going the way he planned?" Mr. Finch pushed his spectacles up. "That is my primary concern. Pemberton is not a stupid man. He will come to the hearing with something. I do not yet know what." The room was quiet for a moment. "I know what," Annalise said. Everyone looked at her. She had been turning it over since Thursday, the one card her uncle still held that she had not yet addressed in any document or statement. She had not spoken it aloud because speaking it aloud made it real, and real things required being dealt with directly. "My father's will," she said. "Specifically, the clause that grants my uncle discretionary authority over my residence and movement until I am 25. He will argue that regardless of the debt arrangement, regardless of Lord Crane, his legal authority to determine where I live and who I associate with is unaffected by any of this." She paused. "And technically, he is right." Another silence. This one heavier. "He can argue, Mr. Finch said carefully, that even if the Crane arrangement is found to be improper, his guardianship authority remains intact, and Miss Pemberton must be returned to his household while the matter is resolved. "Which means I go back," Annalise said flatly. "And once I am back, the hearing becomes academic." The Duke had been quiet through all of this, sitting at the head of the table with his hands folded and his eyes moving between the documents and Annalise's face. Now he spoke. "There is one challenge to that clause," he said. He looked at Mr. Finch. "If she is no longer a ward, if her guardianship is superseded by a legal change in her status." Mr. Finch looked at him over his spectacles for a long, careful moment. Harriet looked at the Duke, then at Annalise, then back at the Duke. "You are talking about marriage," Harriet said, "not a question." "A formal announcement of engagement, filed and witnessed before Monday morning, would complicate the residence clause significantly," the Duke said. His voice was even. "It would shift the legal question from where she lives under guardianship to whether a guardian can compel the dissolution of a formally announced engagement to a peer." "He cannot," Mr. Finch said quietly. "Not without a legal challenge that would take months and generate the kind of public attention that Pemberton cannot afford." The room settled into the particular silence of a decision that has not yet been made, but is already present in the air, fully formed, waiting. Annalise looked at the table. Her heart was doing the loud, inconvenient thing again. She thought about the morning she had woken up in this house for the first time, sitting on the edge of an unfamiliar bed, with her hands in her lap, trying to understand how she had arrived here. She thought about breakfasts shared across a quiet table, about a curtain drawn without a word, about a man who had stood behind her at a window and simply refused to leave. She thought about wanting this for the wrong reasons. She looked up. The Duke was watching her, not with pressure, not with expectation, with the careful, steady attention that she had come to understand was simply how he looked at things he considered important. "I need to speak with you," she said. "Alone." Mr. Finch gathered his papers with diplomatic efficiency. Harriet stood, smoothed her skirt, gave Annalise a look that was equal parts warmth and encouragement, and followed him out. The study door closed. Annalise stood up and walked to the window, not to look out, just to move, just to have something to do with her body while her mind arranged itself. "You said something to me in the breakfast room," she said. "On the first morning, you told me about your mother." "I remember," he said quietly. You did not have to tell me that. You could have said any number of acceptable, polite things that would have answered my question and revealed nothing. She turned to face him. But you told me the truth instead. He was still watching her. I have been trying, she said, to determine whether what I feel when I am near you is gratitude or something else. Because I am aware that gratitude and proximity can construct something that resembles a feeling without being one. I am aware that I am in a desperate situation, and you are the person who helped me, and that awareness could be distorting everything. She stopped, steadied herself. And I have decided, she said, that I am not confused. I know the difference, and I am not confused. End quote. Something moved across his face. That door opened again, wider this time, more light. Annalise, he said, her name in his voice, for the first time without the careful distance of formality. I am not agreeing to this because of Monday, she said firmly. I want that to be absolutely clear between us. If you want to do this, it will not be a legal instrument. It will be a real thing, with real weight, and I will not treat it as anything less than that. He crossed the room, not quickly, deliberately, the way he did everything, and he stopped in front of her close enough that she had to tilt her face slightly to hold his gaze. I have been alone, he said, for a very long time, not for lack of company, for lack of someone who spoke to me the way you just did. He paused. I would like it to be a real thing, very much. She held his gaze. Her heart was full and frightened and entirely certain all at once. Then yes, she said softly. My answer is yes. He reached out and took her hand, carefully, the way he did everything, and held it for a moment between both of his. It was not dramatic. It was not grand. It was quiet and warm and entirely solid, and it was the most safe she had felt in longer than she could remember. Outside, London moved on, indifferent and busy. But in the study of Blackthorn House, something real had just been decided by two people who both understood its weight, and neither of them looked away from it. That evening, Mr. Finch filed the announcement. By Sunday morning, it was known in every relevant circle that the Duke of Blackthorn was engaged to Miss Annalise Pemberton. By Sunday afternoon, 3 separate letters had arrived at Blackthorn House from society figures expressing delight, surprise, and in one case, barely concealed outrage. The Duke read none of them. He left them in a neat stack on Mr. Hatch's desk and went to find Annalise in the library. She was reading, actually reading, this time. She looked up when he came in, and the small, unguarded smile she gave him when she saw it was him was something he quietly stored away in a place he intended to keep. He sat in the armchair across from her. She returned to her book. He picked up the paper. They sat in comfortable quiet for an hour, and neither of them needed it to be anything more than what it was. But Sunday evening brought the thing they had been waiting for. A letter arrived from Silas Pemberton, not to Annalise, to the Duke. 2 pages, densely written, moving from cold civility in the opening lines to something very close to a threat by the final paragraph. He disputed the engagement. He called it a manipulation designed to subvert lawful guardianship. He stated that he would be appearing at the Monday hearing with evidence that the Duke of Blackthorn had deliberately engineered Annalise's disappearance from the Whitmore estate for purposes he described as entirely improper. He was going to claim the Duke had planned it, all of it. The Duke read the letter twice. Then he folded it, set it on the desk, and looked at it for a moment. Prue appeared at the door. Miss Pemberton is asking if you are all right, Your Grace. She says you have been in here a while. He looked up. Tell her I will be out shortly. Yes, Your Grace. Prue hesitated. She also says to tell you that whatever it is, she is not frightened. He looked at the folded letter on the desk. Tell her, he said quietly, that I know. Monday arrived cold and grey. The sky the colour of old pewter. The streets damp from overnight rain. They arrived at the magistrate's court in the Duke's carriage. All four of them. The Duke, Annalise, Harriet and Mr. Finch, who had spent Sunday night reviewing documents and arrived at Blackthorn House at 7 in the morning, with ink on his cuff and the focused calm of a man ready for battle. Annalise wore her hair pinned simply. She had borrowed a composed, high-necked morning dress from Harriet, who was roughly her size and had packed with the practicality of someone who anticipated a formal proceeding. She sat in the carriage, with her hands in her lap, and looked out the window at the passing streets. The Duke sat across from her. Their eyes met once during the journey. He said nothing, but he held her gaze for a moment with an expression that said everything his composure would not, and she felt steadier for it. The magistrate's court was a narrow, wood-panelled room that smelled of paper and old fires. Magistrate Sir Howard Gale was a compact man of 60, with a precise white beard, and the manner of someone who had heard every variety of human dispute, and was no longer surprised by any of it. He sat behind a broad desk, reviewed the filed documents before him, and opened proceedings with efficient brevity. Silas Pemberton was already seated when they arrived. He had brought Mr. Fenwick, his sharp-faced solicitor, and two other men Annalise did not recognize, both of whom had the careful, watchful look of men who had been brought to observe and report. Silas himself looked composed, but she knew the lines of his face well enough to see the tightness beneath it. Beside him, and this made her stomach drop, sat Lord Rutherford Crane. He had come himself, fat-fingered and settled in his chair, with the comfort of a man accustomed to rooms that bent to his presence. He did not look at Annalise when she entered. He looked at the Duke, and the look was long and measuring and entirely without warmth. Mr. Finch laid his documents on the table without visible reaction. Sir Howard opened with the formal complaint. He read it aloud in a flat, measured tone. Unauthorized removal of a ward from lawful guardianship. Allegations of improper conduct. Request for immediate return of the ward to her guardian's residence, pending investigation. Then he looked up. I have also received a counterfiling and several supporting documents. I intend to review all materials before drawing any conclusions. Mr. Fenwick, you may speak to the complaint first. Mr. Fenwick stood. He was precise and confident, building his argument in clean, structured layers. The guardianship was legal and documented. The ward had disappeared from a family gathering under circumstances that could not be adequately explained. She had been located, informally, at the residence of the Duke of Blackthorn, an unmarried man with no prior connection to the family. The announced engagement was sudden and suspicious in its timing, appearing only after the complaint was filed, suggesting it was strategic rather than genuine. He was good. Annalise listened and acknowledged to herself that he was very good. Then Mr. Finch stood up. He was better. He began with Annalise's statement, reading key passages in a clear, unhurried voice. Her discovery of the contract, the deliberate exclusion from all knowledge of the debt arrangement, her departure from the estate of her own free will, witnessed by Mrs. Harriet Callow, who had since travelled from Shropshire and could confirm her cousin's state and circumstances upon arrival at Blackthorn House. Harriet was called to speak. She did so with the composed directness of a woman who had nothing to hide and no patience for those who did. Then Mr. Finch introduced the financial records provided by Mr. Osei, the quarterly payments, 18 months of them, documented, dated and signed. The room shifted. Sir Howard leaned forward slightly. These are payments made by Lord Crane to Lord Pemberton's personal account. Yes, Sir Howard, Mr. Finch said, preceding any formal announcement of an arrangement, constituting, in their structure and documentation, the advance purchase of a ward's hand without her knowledge or consent. Lord Crane's expression did not change, but his hands, Annalise noticed, pressed flat on the table. Silas's jaw tightened. He leaned toward Mr. Fenwick and said something low and rapid. Then Mrs. Daphne Whitfield was called. She entered through the side door with the confidence of a woman who had been waiting 3 years for this room. She was perhaps 50, handsome, and entirely without nervousness. She sat down, looked at Sir Howard, and spoke clearly and without embellishment about the approach Lord Crane had made to her 3 years prior regarding her niece. The language used, the financial structure proposed, the way it had been presented as a standard social arrangement rather than a transaction. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Sir Howard looked at Lord Crane. "My lord, do you wish to respond to Mrs. Whitfield's account?" Lord Crane smiled in the way powerful men smile when they believe a room is still theirs. "Sir Howard, the word of a widow with a grievance against my character hardly constitutes evidence of wrongdoing." "And the financial records?" Sir Howard asked pleasantly. The smile became fixed. Mr. Finch pressed forward. He addressed the residence clause of the will, the argument Annalise had identified on Saturday. He acknowledged its legal validity, and then he introduced the engagement announcement, filed and witnessed, and argued concisely and precisely that the clause's application was superseded by the ward's formal betrothal to a peer of the realm, which constituted a legal change in status that the discretionary residence authority could not reasonably override without compelling grounds. Mr. Fenwick objected. The argument that followed was dense and technical, and moved at a pace that Annalise could not entirely follow, but she watched Sir Howard's face throughout it, and Sir Howard's face was doing something important. It was doing the thing that faces do when a man is persuaded, but taking his time, arriving at it with appropriate dignity. Then Silas Pemberton made his mistake. Perhaps he felt the room slipping. Perhaps the patience required to sit still while his carefully laid arrangements were dismantled piece by piece finally exceeded his capacity. Whatever the reason, he stood up without being invited to speak and addressed the Duke directly. "You engineered this," he said. His voice was controlled, but only barely. "You saw an opportunity, and you took it. A frightened girl in your carriage in the dark, and you saw exactly how to use her situation to your own advantage. The engagement is a fabrication, and everyone in this room knows it." The Duke looked at him. He had not moved. He had sat for the entire proceeding with the stillness of a man who had decided where he was and what he was doing, and required nothing from the room's opinion of it. He said, very quietly, "Sit down, Pemberton." "I will not sit down. You have taken my ward and dressed it up as gallantry, and I will not allow this court to be deceived by it." "The documents speak for themselves," the Duke said, still quiet, still completely unmoved. "The payments, the records, the account of Mrs. Whitfield. The statement of your niece, written in her own hand." He paused. "You sold her. In instalments. For 18 months. And the only fabrication in this room is the story you are telling yourself about why you had the right to do it." The silence that followed was absolute. Sir Howard looked at Silas Pemberton with the expression of a man who has heard enough. "Lord Pemberton, you will sit down, or I will have you removed." Silas sat down. The colour in his face was high and unpleasant. Sir Howard was quiet for a moment, reviewing the documents before him with careful attention. Then he set them down and folded his hands. "The complaint, filed by Lord Pemberton, is dismissed," he said. "The financial arrangement between Lord Pemberton and Lord Crane, as documented in the submitted records, will be referred for further examination to the appropriate legal authority. The ward, Miss Annalise Pemberton, in light of her formal betrothal and the questions raised regarding the conduct of her guardianship, is not to be compelled to return to Lord Pemberton's residence. A full review of the guardianship terms will be scheduled." He looked at Lord Crane. "My lord, I would strongly advise against any further pursuit of the arrangement in question." Lord Crane said nothing. He stood, straightened his coat, and left the room without looking at anyone. He did not look at Annalise, not once. Silas Pemberton sat for a moment after everyone else had begun to move. He looked older than he had when they came in, smaller somehow, the particular diminishment of a man whose certainty has been publicly removed. He looked at Annalise once, across the room. She met his gaze steadily and said nothing. Then he stood and walked out. The room emptied gradually. Mr. Finch shook hands with Harriet. Harriet pressed Annalise's arm warmly. Outside the narrow windows, the grey morning was beginning to lighten, the pewter sky thinning at its edges, pale light pushing through. The Duke came to stand beside her. For a moment they stood together in the emptying room, the document still spread across the table, the fire burning low in the grate. "It is not entirely over," she said. "The guardianship review, the legal examination of the payments, that will take time." "It will," he agreed. "And people will talk for months." "They will." She looked at him. "Are you still not frightened of the arrangement?" He looked back at her, and this time there was nothing behind the composure that was hidden. It was simply him, direct and clear and entirely present. "No," he said. "Are you?" She thought about the girl who had run across a wet lawn with her skirts in her fists and no plan beyond the next 5 minutes. She thought about a black carriage in a dark lane and a curtain drawn without a word and a voice that had said, quietly, that she was safe. She thought about everything that had happened in the days between that night and this morning. The breakfasts, the study, the window, the hand held carefully between both of his. She thought about how terrifying it was to want something real, and she thought about how much more terrifying it would be not to. "No," she said softly. "Not any more." He offered her his arm. She took it, and they walked out of the magistrate's court together into the pale morning light, Harriet just ahead of them, Mr. Finch already talking about next steps, the city moving and breathing around them with its usual magnificent indifference. But Annalise felt none of London's indifference. She felt the solid warmth of the arm beneath her hand. She felt the morning air on her face. She felt, for the first time in longer than she could measure, entirely and completely like herself. 6 months later, they were married in a small ceremony in the chapel at Blackthorn's country estate in Wiltshire. Harriet sat in the front pew with her 4 children arranged beside her in varying degrees of formal behaviour. Mr. Finch attended and wept quietly into his handkerchief, which he afterward denied. Prue, who had been promoted to Annalise's personal lady's maid and took the role with fierce seriousness, declared the event perfect and cried freely without any denial whatsoever. Mr. Hatch stood at the back of the chapel and permitted himself a single dignified smile. At 25, Annalise came into her father's inheritance. She used the first portion of it to ensure that Mrs. Whitfield's niece, who had since found herself in a difficult situation of her own, received legal support and a safe place to recover. She funded it quietly, without announcement, in the same way that she had learned from the man she married that the most powerful things are often done without requiring the room to notice. Silas Pemberton lost his standing in London within a year, the referral for legal examination of the financial records producing consequences he had not anticipated and could not escape. He retired to a small property in the country and was not spoken of in polite society. Lord Crane made no further approaches of the kind Mrs. Whitfield had described. The public record of the Monday hearing had made sure of that. On a quiet evening in the library at Blackthorn House, 2 years after the night it all began, Annalise looked up from her book and found her husband watching her with an expression she had come to know as well as her own reflection. Warm and steady and entirely unguarded in the private spaces where London's opinions could not reach. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "I am just glad you chose my carriage." She laughed, softly, and the sound of it moved through the quiet room like light. "So am I," she said. And outside, London went on being London. But inside, the fire burned warm, the room was full of books and quiet, and the particular peace of 2 people who had found, in the most unlikely of circumstances, exactly where they were meant to be. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Stay tuned for more exciting tales and updates. Your support means the world. And don't forget to tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?